Hello, lovely viewers, and welcome to another devlog. I've been really busy since the last one. I've done loads of illustration work. I've done lots in GDevelop itself. I've set up a whole new scene. There's crazy 70s wallpaper. It's all going on. So let me talk you through each new thing, starting with my new scene. Now, the new scene is Trevor's downstairs hallway and a kitchen as well, which I'll show you in a second. But let me just show you a few new things that have happened. You'll notice that Trevor blinks now. Here we go. There. How exciting was that? He blinks now. About every 2.5 seconds he blinks, and I'll talk through that later because that was actually trickier than you might think to get that up and running. You'll see that there is sort of this lighting effect here, light coming in the front door. That subtly sort of fades away as it gets closer to the carpet here, and you've got these dust motes as well in the light. Which I'm really quite pleased about, those how that looks. It's quite nice. And that's just a particle emitter. There's a particle emitter just here, just off the screen, and it produces, is the word, I guess, these little particles just 2 pixels wide. And they are not affected by gravity. I've put gravity at 0, so they just sort of drift around. They're emitted from here and they drift around for a while and then they disappear. And there's only ever 20 on screen at once. So if you're wondering about the settings. And this sort of light beam is just a transparent PNG that I did in Photoshop. And I gave it a slight blur in Photoshop. And I found that when you blur edges in well, whatever art package you use, and then bring them into GDevelop, you can enlarge things quite a lot. And you don't get funny pixelated edges because your edge is blurry already. So what I tend to do, I create a fairly small light shaft, sort of rays of light in Photoshop, maybe 300 by 400 or something, and I give it a 0.5 Gaussian blur on the edge, and then in GDevelop I drag it onto the scene and I enlarge it in GDevelop to the size I want. And if I want it a bit sharper on the edge, I use less blur. If I want it fuzzier, I use more. I think this is 0.5, so it's about as sharp as I can really get, unless I make the shape bigger in Photoshop. Anyway, so I think it's quite nice. When Trevor walks into it, it sort of affects his colour. It makes him lighter, as if he's actually walking into light. And the dust motes and everything moving around. I'm quite pleased with all that. Actually, I originally did this in Trevor's bedroom, and then I've also done it in the downstairs as well. So simple stuff, but I think quite effective. Now, this game is set in the 90s, so we didn't have smartphones back then. We had these strange devices on the wall in the hallway, typically, and you know, that image of these sort of 90s soaps on British TV where you sit on the bottom of the stairs and have phone calls with people, because no email, no smartphones or anything like that. So it's quite interesting making a game that's set in the 90s, which and the reason I'm doing that is because I was a teenager in the 90s, and I don't know, I just wanted to do that. The interesting thing about designing a game set in the 90s is that you don't have email and smartphones. A lot of games, I've noticed, especially indie games, they'll use smartphones in the games. You'll see text messages pop up between characters, and that's a really nice way of communicating dialogue between characters, of having characters being able to talk to each other even if they're not in the same room. It all kind of makes sense using the metaphor of a smartphone. Or not really a metaphor of a smartphone, an actual smartphone. But in the 90s, you don't have that option. So I've got to think when I'm writing the story that they can't have a text conversation. It's going to have to play out a different way. Anyway, this is the supermarket in my universe. It's called Tasdil, and it's kind of a combination of lots of different supermarket names in the UK. We've got Tesco, Asda, Lidl, and even Aldi comes in there a little bit. So it's a kind of combination of 3 or 4 supermarket names, and I came up with Tasdil. But it's kind of styled around the sort of colour and so on of sort of Tesco branding in the 90s, that I'm going for that sort of vibe. So I'm going to actually be drawing this supermarket later on. He's going to be able to go inside, and there are going to be big aisles full of different products. Anyway, let's go into the kitchen. Oh, actually, on the way, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, where you buy a exercise bike and then about a day later, it ends up in a cupboard or under the stairs, just being used to put clothes on top of. So that's what's happened here. So Trevor and especially his dad, are not exercise fans, really. Actually, I think Trevor probably has a bike and he cycles around and he walks a lot. But certainly the dad who bought the bike, he lost interest in it about a day later. So, right, we walk into the kitchen. And you'll notice he goes from light to dark here, and also there's a bit of parallax scrolling going on here. This divider is moving a little faster than the base layer, and it's got a cobweb here as well, out of focus, so it just adds a bit of depth. And that's how I'm going to divide different rooms when they're part of the same scene. So anyway, you step into this shaded area. And the shaded area is just, again, it's just another PNG, bigger this time, or at least I've stretched it to be bigger. And you've got a very soft edge here, a very soft blend between fully lit, brightly lit, and in the shade, because the sun is rising from the front of the building. And so you would have this sort of shady spot in the back rooms that are facing away from the sun. I'm not going to worry too much about mega accurate shadows and things, but you want to give a feeling of the time of day and what places would be bright and what places wouldn't be. It just adds a bit of depth, a bit of richness to things, and believability as well. You can buy into it as a real place when you've got shadows and highlights and things. Anyway, you've got another bit of parallax going on here. This is the sort of living room. You can see it's moving at a different speed to the base layer, just to give a bit of a sense of depth again. And I've blurred all of this to keep the focus on Trevor and the foreground, the base layer. I've done this little animated clock here. I don't know if it was in school or if it was at home. We had a clock like this, and when the battery runs low, the second hand just flicks back and forth. It sort of gives up a little bit, but still keeps ticking. But it goes forward and back just until the battery dies completely, I suppose. So I didn't want to have a real-time clock that actually ends up being 10 o'clock at night, and then all this sunlight doesn't make any sense. So I thought, I want the clock to be animated. Otherwise, it really shouldn't be there at all. If it's either got the real time on it, or time that advances with the game, or you've got to explain why it's not updating. Now, a lot of games have a clock in their game, in there, that never updates. I mean, I can think of Monkey Island as an example. Is it always 10 o'clock in Monkey Island 2? I can't remember. But obviously back then, having a real-time clock and all that sort of thing would have been a bit of a problem. Plus, if it's a real-time clock, your in-game artwork might be daytime, but the clock says 10 o'clock at night. So anyway, it's a very long-winded way of saying I didn't want to worry about the time of day. So I've got the clock having run out of battery and being faulty, and hence it's hanging at a strange angle. There's some damp damage here. It's sort of telling a story about the condition of the property, about the people who live here. This is a rented property. It's a bit run down. The landlord's not particularly good. It's a one-parent family. There's not much money going around. You're kind of telling a story with these subtle signs of neglect. Someone, perhaps a parent who's a bit depressed and would never get on a chair and change a battery in a clock. They just can't be bothered. It doesn't occur to them. So, this is my new scene. And I think next I will talk to you about transitions. Trevor can now travel between different places. And if I show you here on the scene editor, we've got these green shapes here. And I use those for Trevor to sort of initiate a transition. When Trevor is within a certain distance of these, I can press X and he will travel to a new scene. So let me show you. So if you press X when you're near to the invisible shape here, an icon one day when I get round to it, will appear here maybe, showing that he can go up the stairs, and it might even have the button prompt as well. I'm not sure. So if I press X now, we fade to black, and then we fade back in, and he's appeared in his bedroom, and he's facing the right way as well. So if I press X now, we go back downstairs, and he's facing the different way. Now, how I do this, I use a variable, a global variable, to keep track of where he's coming from. So if he's coming from upstairs, I use that information to put him here and facing the way I want him to face. If he's coming from outside, I'll just go out quickly to show you. He will appear here at the front door, facing in. So, and yeah, I just use a simple global variable setup to do that. The game looks at where he's coming from and where he's going, so that it puts him in the right place and facing the right direction. So let me just show you though while we're upstairs. I'm going to have a little sound effect, of course, of clomping footsteps upstairs and so on. So he appears in the bedroom in the right place by the door, and he's facing the right way. Now if I show you, actually, Trevor's bedroom, where are we? Trevor's bedroom, there we go. Actually, Trevor is off screen. And this is what I'm tending to do now. I have him present in the scene, but off screen, and I set his position using events based on where he's come from. In this particular instance, I could, because there's only one place he can come from, I could just put him in the scene and leave him there, because he's only ever going to be appearing at this door. I could have something at the beginning of the scene, flip him so that he's facing the right way. But anyway, I want my setup to be consistent. So in all my scenes, Trevor now, he's present, and he's either the large or the small version, and he's off screen slightly. And then I use an event that tracks where he's come from so that he gets put in the right place. So anyway, let me run the game again. So here we go, back in the bedroom. So we can go up and down the stairs. Oops, bit of a stutter there. And while we're in the bedroom, I will talk a little bit about it, because I've finished it since last time. And we've just got a nice, well, I think it's nice, I hope it's nice. We've got a nice scene here. Again, I'm using this this shadowy effect here, which is just a blurry PNG. I've got a particle emitter that I'm using to create a screensaver here, and I might actually do this a bit differently later on. I might have, instead of circles, I might have special icons or something that I've drawn being used instead, maybe make it a bit more interesting. I've got a mask on here so that you can't see the particles going outside of the screen. I'm using a shape painter square and a mask extension that uses a shape painter shape as a mask. So that's an extension doing that, and a particle emitter. And then over here again, we've just got these rays of light coming in the window, and we've got some dust motes again. That again, it's a particle emitter just off screen, a bit of force on the the plus X here, and they die after a short amount of time. They fade out, and there's about 20 visible at once, which I might reduce actually, because it's looking a bit like a snowstorm rather than dust motes. So I'll tweak that, I think. But this is my scene, and because I quite often go off topic, I'll do so here. This is the one I had when I was a kid. I couldn't remember the make or the model or anything like that, but I was Googling for sort of 90s stereos, blah, blah, blah. And eventually I found the exact one I had when I was a kid. It had a double tape deck. These speakers were detachable, and I could also connect it to my Amiga, so I could have stereo sound with games and things. I used to love this thing. Quite bassy and chunky. So it was a Sanyo, I think. Yeah, Sanyo. Obviously, I'm not going to put logos and things on here, but it's reminiscent of the one I had when I was a kid. And these, back in the days of the Amiga, games used to come in these chunky cardboard boxes with just one, maybe some of them just had one floppy disk rattling around inside it. It was really silly. Some of you who are terribly old like me might recognize some of these boxes, even though I haven't put text on them. I've used the colors of certain real games. This one in particular you might recognize, and I believe this one had 12 floppy disks in it back in the day. You used to have to swap between them as you were playing. Sometimes you'd get halfway through an animation and you'd have to swap a floppy disk to see the end of the animation. Those were the days, before hard drives became a bigger thing. Anyway, transitions. I'm using a transition extension as well, which uses a shape painter, I believe, to create these lovely transitions. You can tell it how long you want them to be and the type of easing you want to use. The extension is wonderful, and it's got some really snazzy effects, and I'm using quite a boring effect. I'm using a fade to black and back again, and for that reason I might not use the extension. Actually, I might remove it and do it myself, because it's such a simple effect. Having an extension on there just seems a bit unnecessary, but it was nice. That's the effect I want, just this fade to black and back again. But as I say, I'll probably do that myself, either with a black PNG or I'll experiment with the shape painter. So that is my transition stuff. I'll now talk about Trevor's blinking. When Trevor is in his idle animation, as he is at the moment, he blinks. He blinks every 2.5 seconds, and when a certain frame of animation is reached. And I will show you how that works. It was actually quite fiddly and quite tricky. So I've got his blinking eyes here, separate from his animation. They're present in the scene, but they get positioned using events when he's in his idle pose. So in every scene, home street here, we've also got disembodied blinking eyes here, but the small version of them here, because obviously Trevor comes in 2 sizes. So there we go. Back to the kitchen. So actually, not back to the kitchen. I'll show you the blink sort of code here, I suppose. I always hesitate to call it code because it's this event system, but I mean, it is code. So I've got a variable here that can control whether Trevor can blink or not, because there are times when he's in his idle animation that I don't want him to be able to blink. So this is actually, I'm using this as a bit of a bug fix, because there are certain things that happen in the game, like when you initiate dialogue, where I don't want him to be able to blink, because otherwise he leaves his eyes behind and it looks a bit freaky. So that's just a simple way of locking this functionality down if I don't want it to work. And Trevor's group, that just contains both versions of Trevor, the large and the small. So I'm targeting the group here. When the animation is idle, which is 0, and when you get to frame 8, and when a timer that gets created here has reached 2.5 seconds, he can blink. So, and what happens is the blink gets positioned relative to Trevor and plus or minus some pixels, so it's in the right place. It gets flipped sometimes, or maybe doesn't get flipped, depending on what direction he's facing. And then the blink object is shown for 0.2 of a second, and then it's hidden again. And then we reset the timer. And that's it. The reason that I haven't included a blink as part of his actual animation is quite simple, really, because his animation is only 15 frames. And if he blinked, let's say on frame 8, he blinked, he's going to be blinking a lot, because this animation loops. Let's just play it. So blink, blink, blink. If it would just look silly, it would look like he had something in his eyes. So I had a couple of options. I could make this animation longer. I could make this animation 50 frames long, and on the 50th frame or the 25th frame, whatever, he blinks. And then the blinking speed would be natural, but the animation would be really long and bloated, and it would be sort of, 700k or something in PNGs just for this simple idle animation. I mean, already I think I can get it down to lower than 15, but that's a bit of streamlining I'm going to do another time. So I thought, how can I have him blink without having this animation be really, really long? And that's when I came up with the idea of having these blink objects that get shown and hidden in the right place and briefly enough that they line up with his movement and look natural. So let's go back to the kitchen, and hopefully you agree that it does look quite natural. So there we go. It's just a single frame of animation, plays very briefly, and I think that works quite well. The compromise I've made, though, is that he doesn't blink when he walks, and you may already know why that is. We just open up his animation again. I will show you. So this is his walk animation, and you see that his head bobs up and down quite a lot when he's walking, and this is his default speed. When he's outside, he walks fairly swiftly like this. When he's indoors, he walks a bit slower, but this is his speed. It's quite fast. He walks along briskly. You know, he likes to burn the calories, does Trevor. And I found that when I tried to make him blink when he's walking, because his head is bobbing up and down, the blinking eyes, would look like they don't line up with the body. They do briefly line up with the body, but very quickly they're not lining up anymore. And so I thought, crikey, I would have to have him blink really, really, really quickly so that it looked okay. But it didn't look okay. When he blinks really quickly, it doesn't look right. 0.2 of a second seems about right. It feels like a natural sort of blink. So I thought, how on earth can I do it? How on earth can I have this animation, this blink object travel with his head? And I just got into this whole sort of problem solving with it, thinking, well, maybe it's not worth the effort. Actually, there are times when you go down a bit of a rabbit hole trying to solve a problem, and then you think, well, actually, does this need to be a problem? Perhaps it's okay that he doesn't blink when he walks, but he blinks when he's stood still. He blinks when he's talking to characters. Maybe that's a compromise that I'm willing to make. There's no way for me to attach an object to his head because the animation system in GDevelop is not dynamic. I cannot attach eyes to his head and have them travel with his head. This kind of sounds weird. I don't know about Unity. I imagine in Unity there are probably simple ways of doing that. So, and in After Effects, for example, I can attach his neck to his body, I can attach his arms to his torso, I can attach his legs to his torso, and when I move one, the things that are attached come with, and so you can animate things that are joined together very naturally. In After Effects, I animated the head, and the ears travel with the head. And so I could animate them as well, but they're always attached to the head. They're relative to the head. His little hair here is attached to this head. And I think in Unity, it's got animation tools like that. So you could have an animation of some blinking eyes, and you could attach them to the head of your character, and they're always going to travel relative to the head. But there's no way of doing things like that in GDevelop. So I would have to figure out how to make my blinking eyes travel with Trevor. In other words, reposition themselves like this so that they're always in the right place. And I just thought, you know what, that is going to be a big old headache. I'm not going to bother. So he blinks when he's talking to people. He blinks when he's stood still thinking about the world, but he doesn't blink when he's walking down the road, when he's marching to Tasdil. I might revisit that, but I'm picking my fights, as the phrase goes. I'm not going to spend lots of time trying to fix something that doesn't necessarily need to be fixed. I may change my mind about that in the future. So that's the end of another devlog. There's a reason this is on the screen, and I'll tell you in a sec. So yeah, I've been very busy since the last one. What I'm working on right now, my next kind of focus, is I'm remaking the dialogue system. Not the code behind it, not how it works, but I'm changing how it looks. I'm going to completely change how it looks, in fact. I realised that the dialogue system looked a bit boring, and it just doesn't really fit in with the rest of the game. And so I just made the decision to redo it. I've been playing various games recently that all have really nice dialogue systems. They work the same way or a similar way to all the typical yarn stuff that I've covered on this channel. but they look really nice, and maybe they've got some nice little animations when you press for the next line, or they make a little sound effect when you press for the next dialogue line, and they've just got all these nice little touches, and they look like colourful, chunky, fun UI elements that actually fit in with the game properly. I realised that mine looked like it could just be this box here with this text. It could be on a corporate website. It could be some sort of smartphone app. It doesn't really. It's fine, but it doesn't make the most of the game that it's in. And I played a game recently called Little Gator, and another one called Welcome to Elk, and they both do things with their dialogue system that I like. The Little Gator one has this big, chunky, colourful dialogue interface with some animation, and it really just fits the game. It's really nice. And Welcome to Elk, whenever you skip ahead to the next dialogue line, the speech bubble shakes slightly, and there's a sound effect, I think. It's just little things like that that bring it to life and make it feel like it belongs to the game. Whereas mine here, I mean, this could belong to anything. That you could just imagine this on a Lloyds Bank website, this kind of presentation here. You could imagine that on a web app or a web store. It's just very ordinary. And I realized that my day job is graphic design, and this sort of approach would be very appropriate for a lot of the clients I work with. It's very easy to read. The contrast is good. This is you've got some nice friendly rounded corners here. It's not too rigid, but it's quite formal, really. And I didn't want that in my game. I want to take advantage of the fact that this is a video game. And yes, it's very important in your game that the text is legible and the contrast is good and all those rules are followed. But you can be really creative with an interface in a game. So I'm going to completely redesign. I'm already quite far into that, actually. I'm not going to show you now because I'm going to save that for another video. And let me just show you the UI as well. I'm going to redesign that because let's get rid of that. So yeah, you'll remember how my inventory looks. Again, it looks like it could be on a mobile phone. You jab at that with your finger, and these appear, and you jab at these, and it just looks like something. From a website or from a mobile app or something. And I thought I could be more creative with this. I love the rucksack, that's staying. But this thing that folds out from the rucksack, it doesn't need to be this sort of like a mobile phone app kind of rounded corners shape here. It could be fabric, the fabric that's inside the bag, for example. We could have some stitching along the edges. I could have some stickers on it. Whatever. Just be more creative with it and take advantage of the fact this is a video game and you can be creative with your UI. It doesn't have to look quite sort of rigid and formal. As I say, like it's on a mobile phone or something. It could be quite creative. So I'm going to revisit all my UI stuff, and I'm starting with the dialogue system. So that I'll probably do a video when the dialogue system is ready, and just to sort of talk you through what I've done. And then if there's some interest, I could maybe do some tutorials on how to achieve those things. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there for now. That's what's coming up. That's what I'm working on now. And thanks very much for watching. And before I start waffling on about cookery and the meaning of life and God knows what else, I will say good day to you, and see you next time.